So we're going to continue with our agenda here, and like I said, we just switched up some things real quick, and I want to introduce this gentleman. He's doing great things for the state of Montana, for his people, for our people, and I want you guys to put a big round of applause together for Mr. Senator Jonathan Windyboy.
Thank you very much there, Casey, and it's good to be back to Fort Belknap here. See a lot of relatives here and see new faces and some of the previous summits that have been conducted. One that was hosted by Fort Peck. I want to thank the Crow Tribe for their invitation to the one that they sponsored here last month as well. And there is also a Save Indian Language Summit in Billings held last month. So the momentum of this movement is going at a pretty good pace, and I think that Montana being ahead of the curve around the country, far and beyond the rest of the states, and it's really good to see that this momentum is an ongoing process. And before I go into some of the updates that we had as late as last week, I want to give you guys a little bit of a history, because some of you I've never seen in any of these history presentations that I've given in the past on how we got to this point with what the Montana's efforts are. In 2012, after the last my last Senate election, that December, I went into one of the schools up there at home, and one of my principals, I sat down in his office and I asked him, well, our legislature is going to be starting here pretty quick, and within a month here, and I want to ask you what it is that I can do, what kind of message I can take with me. What changes can we have on our local level here that's affecting our children, our communities here, our school systems here? Just kind of wanted to leave a wide swath of opportunity for him to make comment. And one of the things that really caught me was just caught me off, not by surprise, but just a confirmation that my arguments and my perception of what goes on in Indian communities was solidified with what he was going to share with me. So what he did is he reached down in his bottom drawer there, and he pulled out 23 letters. 23 letters. And in those letters were expulsion of students who was on the last ring of discipline measures in the school system. So I asked him, I said, okay, correct me if I'm wrong, I said, if these students here that are on this list, if they're on the last discipline measure, then what's their alternative? What alternative do they have? He said, well, the alternative they have, there isn't any. I have to kick them out of school. I have to expel them. I have to. So that was kind of a shocker to me. And he said to boot, he said, not only do I have to expel them, but half the basketball team is on this list. And you know how it is when you mess with reservation basketball. You have an uprising. So when he told me that, I said, well, okay, so if you kick these students out, then more than likely they're going to go from Rocky Boy, go 15 miles down the road, because there is a state law that you have to go to school till you're 16 years old. And so if they go from here to there, more than likely without addressing their needs or their issues, they're going to carry the same issues that why they got kicked out of here down to Box Elder, for example. And more than likely, the same thing that they're going to have, they're going to be faced with are the same things. So if they get kicked out of that school, then they'll go to Havre. And if they get kicked out of Havre, they'll have no place else to go. So maybe the time for them to be eligible again. So this was a cycle, is what I've noticed, and it's the same cycle that I have been addressing at the Capitol. Why it's important to address the social needs of our communities. To be successful, for our students to be successful, we need to take a look at what goes on at home. We need to address what goes on at home, because when OPI came to us in our education committee, boy, right away they want to pound their chest, they want to claim victory. And they say, we have 75% graduation rates completed. Oh man, it sounds good. I'm proud of those 75% of those students who are succeeding. But I asked OPI, I said, well, what about this 25%? I want to look at the list of the schools of these that's on this 25%. That's where I'm at. That's what I want to see. And so I had OPI bring the list of those schools just to see if my suspicions were correct. Sure enough, a couple weeks later, in comes some of the administration folks at OPI and gave me the list of the schools that were on that 25% failing list. Sure enough, every school on every reservation and the border towns around reservations made up that 25%. So I told them, OPI, I said, okay, now this is the reason why we are failing our kids in Indian communities, because I always say that we don't know what goes on at home. Maybe there's alcohol issues, maybe there's drug issues, maybe there's meth issues, maybe there's incest issues, maybe there's gambling issues. There's a lot of social things that go on in our communities that we need to approach somehow to address that. And we need to encourage that type of environment. We need to encourage our communities to take a stand, to take a hold of what goes on in these communities, because we're all in on this together. From the tribal council level all the way to the young parents. And so that we need to find out what goes on. Because a lot of times, you probably noticed this in the school system in the last probably 20 or 30 years, that we have this ADHD thing. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And how do we address that? How do the schools address that? Well, plug them in with Ritalin. Those are the types of things where all of these folks over in Helena, they think they know what's wrong with the communities, but I think it's the communities that need to say enough is enough. We need to make our communities stronger. So this was the message that I had for OPI, that we need to address this. I said, and we even tried to come up with some type of a solution. Okay, a lot of these social issues could be, you need to make the bureaucracy a lot smoother. Maybe you could team up with Department of Health and Human Services, and to try to address some of these, what I refer to as wraparound services. And I saw that, and I see that in my community when I was on council. As the bureaucracy sometimes gets way off base. And so anyways, that was what my thinking was. And then he pulled up another 33 papers. And he told me that, getting back to that principle, And he said, now these 33 students, he said, their next step is where these 23 are. So that kind of raised some red flags for me, because if we have 56 students in one school, can you imagine how many of our schools around Indian country that are faced with the similar scenario? So this was the reason why. What can we do to try to capture the students, try to capture the communities? And so when he told me that, and we went a whole round of discussion of what we just described about what's going to probably go on with those students. And so this stuck in my mind when I went down in the 2013 session. And I thought, how can we change a failing system for our community? And so what I did is I got a bill draft, language immersion in public schools. Right away, my native colleagues up there, they wanted to put out grants, they wanted to funnel in millions and millions into grants and just basically beef up. To me, it looked like we were beefing up the administration at OPI, which I didn't want to happen. I wanted to make sure that the communities can make the best decisions and use of what resources that we provide them. So I thought about that and I said, you know what? Before we immerse anything, we need to take a couple steps back. We need to take a couple steps back, and before we immerse something, we need to preserve what little we had. And so that's how that MILP came about, Montana Indian Language Preservation Project. And so we put together that particular bill. And one of the things that was one of our strangleholds was money. And there was a $2 million price tag that was put on there. And boy, nobody didn't want to move on that. Nobody wanted to touch that with a 10-foot pole. Where are we going to get the money? We don't have money like that. And I thought, you know what? We're sitting on a $9 billion budget here. Not million, billion at the stage here. There's got to be some money in here, I thought, because it's sitting on the Senate Finance Committee. I was able to look at different parts of the budget there that the state wasn't using at the best use. I couldn't find any at that time without the administration and without the budget director and the governor's office's help. I was a lone soldier trying to make this thing work. And so what did I do? I took $2 million out of Indian Head for All. And man, I tell you, that red flags went up all over. OPI was making me look like a bastard of Montana because I'm robbing their pet project. Well, it only made sense because the budget, the Senate Finance Committee chairman said, well, I told you if you could find the money, I'm going to support you. So he did. Out of the 90-day session, it was right until that 80th day, 83rd day, when finally the administration, after I was being called every name in a book. But it was a rough go, and I thought, I'm not going to let this thing go. I'm going to push it through. And I had the votes in both chambers for that $2 million. And miraculously, what happened? The budget director comes and pulls me aside. Guess what? We found $2 million. So I always say, if there's a will, there's a way. And after being called alone, I was out there all by myself. I went on a limb. I went on a limb because this was something that I believed in. This is something that Indian country needed. And it was a constitution. That was one of my main arguments. Every time I got up and spoke, I quoted Article 10, section of the Montana Constitution that says specifically that Montana will recognize and and protect the cultural integrity of the Indian tribes in Montana. And this was a part of it. This was how these the OPI and these other people who have strangleholds on that Indian Ed for All. That's the language that they use in courts. But this, what we're doing, what all of you are doing in the trenches, this is what should be utilized. This is what, for me, this is where the Indian Ed for All should be spent. The $9 million that we spend every 2 years. It should be coming to you guys because you guys are doing, you guys are in the trenches, you guys are doing all the work that they should be working. Why do I say that? Is because in the 2011 session, you might have seen this article in the Missoula paper where that the state distributed Indian Ed for All around the state to teach, to allow school districts to teach Indian history and stuff in Montana public schools. And what did Missoula do? A couple $1 million went over to the Missoula public school system. They funnel into the general fund, and once some of you guys who understand how that finances work, once money goes into the general fund, it loses identity. And so when they funneled that Indian Ed for All into their general fund, they gave their teachers raises. For me, that wasn't what that intent was. That's why I say that we need to try to just stay on this stuff. Even to this day, I still feels like a lone soldier on this issue. So I thought about that. And after we got that $2 million in there, everything goes in there with the language that the tribes had given were given the final stamp of approval that this is Chippewa Cree. I'm going to use my own tribe because that's why I know that the Chippewa Cree Tribal Council and the tribe had given this stamp of approval, and because we don't want to go out there and teach rest of Montana that all of these Pocahontas stories and all of these other fables that isn't our history. And so that way, once we provide this, and there was also language in that law that I made sure was kept, the integrity of the cultural and intellectual property rights belong to that tribe. So if anybody were to take any of the information from Fort Belknap, for example, the Assiniboine Grove one, or Assiniboine Fort Peck, or Crow, or Northern Cheyenne, they have to get that approval if they're going to publish anything. Why was that important? Because my experience, I remember this experience when I was on council, we gave these Department of Health and Human Services cultural grants to assist people with issues, mental health issues, substance abuse, mental health. And those funds went into the state, and the state distributed those funds through granting system. Why I was kind of opposed to as part of that granting system, because it opened up all the RFPs statewide rather than reservation-wide. And what happened at that time, 10 years ago, when those grants were let, was that the Chippewa Cree Tribe grant writers and the Fort Belknap grant writers, we submitted for this grant communities. And who got that grant for our area was Hill County, because they had some good grant writers. As a matter of fact, our team was there at the time when we had those grants at SAMHSA. And when we looked at that, how the heck did Hill County beat Rocky Boy and Fort Belknap tribes on cultural sensitivity grants? Kind of confused me. What happened here? Something's wrong with this picture. Because our grant writers were savvy enough that we don't go beyond that taboo of putting cultural teachings or whatever in these grants, there's that line that we don't cross. But where Vail County beat us was that they received cultural sensitivity training in Helena. And so that shot their score way up there, and they were awarded that contract, and kind of didn't make mistakes. And that was the reason why it was important to have this cultural piece in the law, to recognize and to empower the tribes. Okay, we recognize your position, we recognize your power that you have. And so when you move forward here with that law, and then I had a lot of opposition, man, I tell you. Even my own native colleagues around the state. You may think that we had a lot of, I had 100% with all 9 of our legislators. Heck no, I was the only one. Because I was robbing the Indian Ed for All, and a lot of them were right in the education system. So right till the very end, when we finally found out money, that's when everybody wanted to come on board. But I tell you, man, you know that saying that a lot of these white farmer, bald-headed white guys, legislators, they're lawmakers, they're racist and all of that stuff. You get their Ed Butchers and this and that. But my experience with those, they've become my strongest allies, not because that they of their attitude that may look racist, but I found out that they're uneducated with the issues that we're faced with. And so by sharing with them, educating them, that's how we switched them into our favor. Because then they understood. Then they said, oh, I get it now. Those are my strongest allies. Even though I'm a Democrat, I had every Democrat opposing this at first. And so anyways, why they did that, I have no idea. But it didn't faze me. I wasn't going to let this, I was going to back down on this. Move forward. I'm going to push this. I'm going to push this because this is what tribes need. We need to hang on to our language. We need to hang on to preserve what little we had. And so part of that law, which allowed the tribes to do surveys, and it was good because it gave us the tools for the next session of why it's important for us to do this. What we found out from my tribe in Rocky Boy next door is that we have 7,000 enrolled members, 4,000 residents, but we only had 165 fluent speaking Crees. And we found that synonymous with all of the tribes here around the state. And my colleagues in Helena found that they were astounded by those numbers. And that's what I told them. I said, we have that constitutional obligation to do this. We have a constitutional obligation to make sure that this is alive, stays alive. Because if we don't, we're going to, in our generation, we're going to bear witness that we're going to find the extinction of Indian languages within our lifetime. That's why it's important. That's why it's important. But not only that, I did not share with them. One elder mentioned language is the key. Language is the connection that we have to Almighty. That's why it's important for those elders who came to testify. That was part of the reason why it was important when Crow came to testify, when Fort Peck came to testify, when Fort Belknap came to testify, when everybody that came down there during the legislature, they all told a story that was their own story that made our argument stronger. And so during that first round, That's during the trip after the 2013 session. So we got the 2 million in there, divided up 8 ways, the 7 reservations in Little Shell, and it came up to 200, and I think it was like 267,000 per tribe. But it wasn't perfect. We still had people coming, hey, how come we didn't have it? We have two tribes in our reservation. We should divide this up equally, all 10. Oh, boy, I tell you. We had all kinds of arguments of what should have been and what should have done. I was just happy we got something. So when that happened, the governor made his trips around the state to every reservation. The first issue that came up, we need to support that. We need to encourage that. We need to keep on going with language preservation. So during the next session, what does he do? He takes that language preservation and he sticks it into the state budget at 1.5 million. So each reservation was getting that 1.5 million divided up 8 ways, which was good. Because I was thinking right away going into that last session, I said, man, it's going to be tough to try to go back after that, but it was a relief because it was already stuck into the state budget and we didn't have to fight for any funds. So I thought, well, okay, that thing has its life its own. I said, as long as if we keep our governor in there through 2020, then it's going to be safe. But the policy part of it, we need to renew that particular statute in the next session, because if we don't, then the law will expire. So after that happened, that was the 2013 session on the language preservation piece. Then we came up, I said, okay, that thing's got its own life. Now we can move to the next step, language immersion. So what I did is I sat down with my staff, okay, I told them what my thoughts were. I said, I just wrote it down. That's how we just write down ideas, how it builds and stuff, and then the drafters, they go through it and they go through different statutes and there's existing language, it needs to be amended, blah, 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 blah. So I told them, I said, okay, this is what I want. I said, I want to give the opportunity for Montana to recognize alternative schools. Language will be the priority. And I gave them that scenario of what I shared with you of these 23 students and these 33 students, which equated to 56. We can't give up on these kids. We can't give up on those who are on that level, because every community has that. So I said, well, rather than having that as expulsion being their last ditch effort, let's provide that opportunity that we have this language program to assist them. So we started putting together the language on that, and next thing you know, we had, after he finished drafting it, he came back and said, public charter schools on reservations. I said, oh my gosh, I told him, charter school right now is like a cuss word in Helena. It would never pass, I told him. So we had him change it and put language immersion. So after that, I grabbed that bill and I called together OPI, Digital Academy, some tribal colleges, school board associations, school administrators, all of these people that had involvement with public policy, with education, with the Montana education system, and I told them, okay. I said I had my little box of an office. I gave each of them a copy of that. I said, okay, this is what I'm doing. I said, before I drop this in the hopper, I said, I want you to take a look at this. I'll give you guys 1 week. Go through this. If there's anything that you don't agree on this, mark it up. If there's something that you agree on it but needs to be beefed up, mark it up. And I used reverse psychology on it because the language, if they looked into that language, they would have saw it would have been charter school language. And so they did. They took it. They went home. They probably stayed up late nights reading the law, the language in that law. And they came back and every one of them, they all had some comments on it. I said, okay, I'm going to take this and go down and have them, we'll meet tomorrow afternoon. The Bills drafter should have this, a rough draft of this. So sure enough, we came back and oh man, I brought back the next month, the final draft of that drafting one. And they all said, yeah, it looks good, looks good. So I dropped it, and rather than having anybody opposing it, any of these organizations that usually support or oppose bills, I had every one of them standing in the supportive aisle. I had no opposition on this. And that's how we got it pushed through. And so the language of what my thoughts were, with my experience as a tribal leader from 98 to 2010, and seeing what goes on in our communities, what happens in our communities. Number one, tribal colleges are kind of a central focus on our local level. So why don't we capitalize the tribal colleges as a part of this? And our tribal colleges today probably don't realize how big of a role. And we found out this in Fort Peck because as one of the administrators for the tribal colleges didn't realize what role and how big of a role they played in this. As I mentioned, that this with the language of the bill of the law, there are CEUs that the tribal colleges, continuing education units that the tribal colleges are able to offer, and they'll receive additional funding accordingly, so on and so forth. Language teachers, there's now a movement to revive that old Class 7 language certification process that the OBI had way back in the bilingual days of teaching in the 70s. As a matter of fact, they're having a Class 7 language certification conference next week. It's that second annual one. And so, instead of reinventing the wheel, we kind of dusted off a lot of the stuff that was in place, or something that made sense, that was more simpler than what wasn't. Digital Academy was something that we formed and funded in 2009. And what that does is it allows distance learning. Why did I think it was important? Because think about that 7,000 enrolled members I have in Rocky Boy, 4,000 residents. That tells me there's 3,000 of my members that are out there somewhere out there. Did they have an opportunity to learn their language? Probably not. That's why I say that tribal colleges need to kind of broaden their horizon, broaden the promotion of the tribal colleges of how this can help. Because right now, a lot of my enrolled members are in Great Falls, for example. And this distance learning will allow them to do that. Now we're getting into the language immersion portion of this law, of the law that's existing right now. Public schools have our kiddos, our school children, from 8 to 4 every day. And if we have this, the teaching of the language in our public schools every day, man, that would be great. Oh, geez, boy, have our little kids learning language. But the shortfall of that, what's going on there, is pretty good chance. If my tribe only has 165 fluent speakers out of 4,000 residents, more than likely those little kiddos there probably aren't going to have anybody to converse with once they get home. So I thought, well, how can we do this? Well, okay, I thought. Knowing the social services program, general assistance and TANF recipients are required to go out there and look for work 20 hours a week if they want to get their check. So I thought, well, how about if we do this and we allow those people who are on public assistance, if we could encourage a policy to allow those recipients to get language courses at the college for that work requirement. Because we know, looking around at every reservation here, we're looking at anywhere from 50 to 70% unemployment rate, so we know dang well that employment opportunity isn't really available there. So why can't we encourage our social service programs to help recipients? Because that way, this becomes a family strengthening tool as well, because you have the students coming in from school every day, boy, they're talking their language, oh geez, boy, you come to 1 to 100, and then the parents are looking at them kind of wondering and probably wishing they had that opportunity. Well, there will be an opportunity for them, because the college will be that hub. If the tribal colleges get on board with this thing, they can allow their existing language courses that's being offered in the daytime to be offered for evening courses. That way the parents can get their 20 hours a week, bring their kids along, and learn the language at the same time, so that way they can have a more cohesive family unit. And that was my thinking. That's why the communities need to get a buy-in on this. And this thing is so new, and we're so ahead of the rest of the states that even our own communities in Montana aren't really too familiar with what the existing law is and how we can take advantage of that. So that's what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to take this dog and pony show wherever I can to share this. We don't have to create this. This is existing law right now. We just need to, we need to understand this, we need to get this, we need to put everything in place here. That's where we're at. That's where we're at, and how we can do that. One of my colleagues during the legislature asked me, he said, I'm going to support you on this, but I have one issue with this. And I said, what's that? She said, the discipline action on that. Does this thing tell me that the only way that a student can get into this program is if they have to get in trouble? I thought about it. I said, you know what, you have a good point there. And she said, why don't we just offer this to everybody rather than have it on their last ditch to capture them? And so we took that language out, and so she was one of my strongest allies in pushing it through. And top it off, she was a Republican, so that really helped a lot more too. And after we got through with this, we got this thing going and going and going. And then the teacher part of it. What are the incentives for teachers? Okay, we all have teachers out there who are certified with a 4-year degree, with their teacher certification and everything. Boy, that 4-year, if he talks really good Indian, good language, speaks their language fluent, good. And so that teacher incentive is that if that teacher who is fluent with their language, who has a 4-year teaching degree, that was where the incentive program came in with that class 7. That teacher who was bilingual fluent bilingual with their language, that would allow them to have an increase, $4,000 in their annual salary, up to $4,000. So we try to be creative to try to make this thing, get everybody's buy-in here. And I'm sure that there's probably some teachers that you probably see in your own communities that are able to put this in on the local level. And so Digital Academy, how their role is. Say for example, we have a lot of students out there, whether it be Great Falls, Missoula, Billings, and once they catch on, once those school districts catch on, they can tap into, through distance learning, at your local tribal college on evening courses, where they too can learn at the same time as your local parents and students who's learning in the evening courses. So I was asking my bills drafter, okay, we're going to have this language immersion. How does a school district qualify to be a language immersion? So he threw some ideas at me. I said, okay, well, how about if we do a 10%? If you have 10% Native population in your school district, you qualify. So we put that down. And so once we did that, that was in language, and then we had OPI. Okay, give us a list of this 10%. How many schools do we have in the state of Montana that are eligible to be to have language programs? They came back and they said that, okay, we have 88 schools across the state of Montana that's eligible with 10% Native population. And that's how we became familiar with Great Falls, Missoula, Kalispell, Billings. Even Butte, I believe, made it. Bozeman made it. And so that was what, and that was why I felt was important, was that would capture some of our students that are out there. Even the parents can come in evening time, they're off work, go to local, wherever they might be, the Indian Center or wherever that might be, that maybe Great Falls High or something, using that as an example. And they can tap into either Rocky Boy, or they can tap into Crow, or they can tap into Fort Peck. That's why we need to capitalize what resources that we have to make this a success. So this is why it was important. This is why we needed to utilize existing resources that we have right now, rather than reinventing the wheel. And then, to go further, being the chairman of the State Tribal Relations Committee, I made sure every quarter that we get updates. And you probably heard that one cook lady this morning give her update. And she's giving us some pretty good updates quarterly. The governor's office is giving us good updates every quarterly. And I tell you, man, a couple of my committee members that serve on that committee are probably the most right-wing you can think of. One of them was even a part of Sierra. That's how right-wing it was. But for them to learn what's going on in Indian communities, that's why I say that we educated them enough to become good allies for us during the next session. So last week, we had our summer meeting, quarterly meeting in Helena, the State Tribal Relations Committee. And I took down there a message. What do we need to improve language immersion? How do we improve the language immersion to make it more, I guess, user-friendly for communities? And I left this open for everybody's discussion. I said, these are my thoughts. I said, I'm just going to come right out and basically told them that this is what my thoughts were. I'd like to see one designated immersion project per reservation and one for Little Shell and Great Falls. Did you guys catch that? Those of you writing? This was a motion made in last week's meeting. The first one again is one designated language immersion project per reservation. The second was for funding, asking for funding for a state conference on immersion programs to share best practices. Funding for a state conference on immersion programs to share best practices. Could be an annual conference. The third one is for programs to allow state funding that they received to be used as leverage for federal funding. Some of your programs probably have A&A grants out there for language projects. The language that if it goes through here would allow you to match dollar for dollar for those federal fundings. And not only that, federal funding, but it can also, the language will also read that you can go after it for private foundations. And so these are the language would allow you to go after these matching dollars to roll out immersion schools and to other schools within the reservation. And the last part of that is, right now the existing language of this law is that once the school goes immersion, you have to do 50% language immersion, which is good, I mean, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to graduate that, have a gradual increase of up to 50%. So once a school decides to go there, because that was important, is that school districts needed to take the action to be an immersion. And so this allows the school districts to come forth. Do I have a phone call? Oh, time. Jeez, am I that long-winded? But anyways, I hope I didn't bore you guys. Did I bore you guys? No. You want me to talk more about it? Yeah. Okay, you're overruled there. Right. But anyways, I'm almost done here anyway. I just wanted to share that latest action last week because that's going to be our next, if we're going to move on that, that's going to be our final hope. I'm hoping to get a committee bill out of that, and why it's important for us to get committee bills up at the last of our interims is that those committee bills, those committees are made up of 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats, and once we get a committee bill out into the legislature, the chances of it are a lot better than if it wasn't, because you have bipartisan support on it. So that was why it was important to